Most people think belly fat is just the fat they can see and pinch. But the fat that causes the most long-term health problems is usually the fat you cannot touch. This is called visceral fat. Visceral fat sits deep inside the abdomen, surrounding organs like the liver, pancreas, and intestines. Unlike the fat under your skin, visceral fat is metabolically active. It releases inflammatory chemicals, interferes with insulin signaling, and is strongly associated with conditions like type 2 diabetes, fatty liver disease, and cardiovascular problems. Understanding how this fat forms and why it stays requires understanding how the body responds to stress. Cortisol, not the enemy, but often misused. Cortisol is commonly labeled the stress hormone, but that label is misleading. Cortisol is actually a survival hormone. It has kept humans alive for thousands of years. When the brain perceives a threat, physical or psychological, it activates a system known as the HPA axis, involving the hypothalamus, pituitary gland, and adrenal glands. This system increases cortisol production to mobilize energy. Cortisol raises blood glucose levels, so the body has immediate fuel. At the same time, it temporarily reduces non-essential processes like digestion, muscle building, and reproduction. This response is highly effective in short bursts. Problems arise when this system stays active for too long. Why stress favors visceral fat storage. Visceral fat tissue is especially sensitive to cortisol because it contains a higher density of glucocorticoid receptors. When cortisol remains elevated repeatedly, this tissue becomes a preferred storage site for excess energy. From an evolutionary perspective, storing energy close to vital organs was advantageous during times of scarcity. In modern life, however, stress is often psychological, prolonged, and not followed by physical exertion. As a result, glucose released under cortisol's influence is not fully used. Insulin is then released to clear this glucose from the bloodstream. When high cortisol and insulin are present together, particularly in sedentary conditions, energy is more likely to be stored as visceral fat. This is not a flaw in willpower. It is a predictable biological pattern. The chronic stress loop. Modern stress rarely comes in short bursts. Instead, many people experience long periods of low-grade stress driven by work pressure, sleep disruption, constant stimulation, and mental overload. When cortisol does not return to baseline, the body remains in a semi-emergency state. Over time, this can contribute to increased visceral fat storage, reduced insulin sensitivity, and difficulty maintaining lean muscle mass. In some individuals, this pattern contributes to the skinny fat appearance, relatively thin limbs combined with disproportionate abdominal fat. Chronic stress can increase muscle breakdown while favoring fat storage around the organs, especially when combined with inactivity and poor recovery. Hormonal effects of prolonged stress. Under sustained stress, the body prioritizes cortisol production. This can suppress the production of anabolic and reproductive hormones such as testosterone and estrogen. While the concept often referred to as pregnenolone steal is debated in scientific circles, there is consistent evidence that chronic stress is associated with lower sex hormone levels, reduced muscle maintenance, and altered body composition. The takeaway is not that stress directly steals hormones, but that prolonged stress shifts the hormonal environment in a direction that favors fat storage and muscle loss. Stress, appetite, and cravings. Stress also affects appetite regulation. One chemical involved in this process is neuropeptide Y, which increases during stress and can drive cravings for calorie-dense foods, particularly carbohydrates. This response evolved to help replenish energy quickly during times of perceived threat. In modern environments, where energy is abundant and stress is constant, this mechanism can contribute to overeating without conscious intent. Again, this is biology, not a lack of discipline. Why more stress doesn't solve the problem. When visceral fat is driven partly by chronic stress, adding more stress rarely helps. Extreme dieting, severe calorie restriction, or excessive endurance cardio can elevate cortisol further, especially in already stressed individuals. While cardio and calorie control are not inherently harmful, they must be applied in a way that allows recovery. Fat loss becomes more sustainable when the nervous system perceives safety, not constant threat. The role of low-stress movement. One of the most effective tools for reducing baseline stress while improving fat metabolism is walking. Walking uses fat as a fuel source without triggering a strong stress response. It improves insulin sensitivity and supports recovery. Forward movement and changing visual input during walking are associated with reduced stress signaling in the brain. This does not mean walking alone is sufficient, but it creates a physiological environment where fat loss becomes easier rather than harder. Why resistance training matters. Resistance training plays a different role. Lifting weights sends a powerful signal to preserve and build muscle tissue. Over time, it improves insulin sensitivity and supports a hormonal environment that counterbalances the effects of chronic stress. Although resistance training temporarily increases cortisol, it reduces baseline cortisol levels when properly programmed and recovered from. Preserving muscle gives glucose somewhere to go, reducing the likelihood that excess energy is stored as visceral fat. Nutritional timing and circadian rhythm. Cortisol follows a daily rhythm. It is meant to be higher in the morning and lower in the evening. Modern habits often disrupt this rhythm through late caffeine intake, irregular eating patterns, and insufficient sleep. A protein-rich breakfast can support metabolic signaling early in the day without excessive insulin spikes. For many people, consuming carbohydrates later in the day may support relaxation and sleep by increasing serotonin availability, which contributes to melatonin production. This approach is not universal, but it can be useful when aligned with activity levels and overall calorie intake. Sleep, a non-negotiable factor. Sleep deprivation significantly impairs insulin sensitivity and increases stress hormone output. Even short-term sleep loss can shift the body toward energy conservation and fat storage. Prioritizing sleep, consistent schedules, a dark and cool environment, and reduced stimulation at night is not passive rest. It is an active metabolic strategy. Without adequate sleep, visceral fat loss becomes far more difficult, regardless of diet or exercise quality. Micronutrients and stress resilience. Chronic stress increases the demand for certain micronutrients, particularly magnesium. Magnesium plays a role in nervous system regulation, muscle relaxation, and stress modulation. Deficiency can amplify the stress response. Supplementation with magnesium glycinate, along with adaptogenic herbs such as ashwagandha or rhodiola, may help reduce perceived stress and modestly lower cortisol levels over time. These tools support the system. They do not replace foundational habits. Controlled stress and adaptation. Short controlled stressors, such as cold exposure, can improve resilience. While cold exposure briefly raises cortisol, repeated exposure trains the nervous system to recover more efficiently, potentially lowering baseline stress over time. Cold exposure may also activate brown fat, a type of fat tissue that burns energy to produce heat. This can contribute modestly to metabolic health when used appropriately. The psychological component. The brain does not distinguish clearly between physical danger and persistent psychological stress. When life is perceived as a continuous emergency, the body behaves accordingly. Practices like slow, deep breathing activate the vagus nerve and shift the nervous system into a parasympathetic state, the state in which digestion, repair, and fat mobilization are most efficient. This is not a relaxation trick. It is a physiological switch. When the body feels safe again, burning visceral fat is not a test of discipline, punishment, or suffering. It is not about forcing your body harder, starving it longer, or exhausting it into submission. Visceral fat is a response. It forms when the body repeatedly receives signals of threat, urgency, and survival. As long as those signals stay active, the body will continue to store energy close to vital organs, just in case. When stress is reduced, sleep is protected, movement is balanced, and muscle is preserved, those emergency signals begin to quiet down. Walking tells the nervous system that you are not trapped. Lifting tells the body that muscle is needed. Proper sleep tells the brain that repair is safe. Calmer routines tell your hormones that the emergency has passed. When the body feels safe, it no longer needs to hoard energy. Visceral fat did its job during times of uncertainty, but when safety becomes consistent, that job is no longer necessary. And that is when visceral fat finally lets go, not because it was forced, but because it is no longer needed.